Welcome to everybody tonight or during the day, if this is you're listening from the west coast of America, to an absolute treat. We've had a wonderful day here in the University of Buckingham and in the UK, perhaps the last summer day of 2020. And we have the great arguably the greatest, certainly the longest serving writer about film. Many people think that he has taken the art of writing about film to altogether new level. I cannot imagine a more fun job than watching films and writing about them. I think that David is certainly not contradicted me, has written 38 books about film, starting 53 years ago, and has just published the film about Hollywood's Gods at Work, which we will talk about. So David, welcome to the Great Lives series.
Thank you for having me.
And tell us, where are you, and is this the room in which you work?
I am in my office in our apartment in San Francisco. It's just after 10 a.m. here. It's the room where I work, although my wife complains bitterly that I let my work spread to other rooms. And we have a room with a television screen, which, as you can imagine, is a very important part of our life. And I do a lot of work in that room, taking notes about films and that kind of thing. But this is the room, and this is the chair in which I usually type whatever I'm working on.
And do you type yourself?
I do, very badly. But I've learned that I type so badly that the process of rewriting and correction is, for me, a very big part of what I do. And I would say that I am more a rewriter than a writer. I like the initial composition, but I love rewriting it.
Now, to everyone, vast audience tonight, unsurprisingly for you, David, a reminder that do have questions. This is a really informal hour with the great guru of film, and he has just said to me that he loves to have left field questions. So whichever field you live in and inhabit and want to pitch in questions from, David is ready to take everything. And this is the first question from me. Very roughly, David, how many films have you seen? It started, I bet you walked out of some. In your life.
In the period when I was most intensely seeing films, which was probably in my 20s, 30s, 40s, let's say, I was seeing maybe between 400 and 500 films a year. And I did not tire of that. As I've grown older, watching them has become harder. And I would also say that for me, a lot of the films of the last couple of decades are simply not as compelling, as gripping as some of the films I saw when I was younger. So I walk out of films, I turn them off, because I'm often watching on the television screen, as most of us are. And I turn films off in a way that I think would have shocked me when I was a younger person, when I was more pledged to the integrity of the whole work. I think it's a natural response to growing older. I also spend time now not watching new films so much as rewatching old films. Yeah, go on.
It's a question there, David. Which film have you seen and re-seen the most in your life?
It has to be Citizen Kane, because I wrote a book about Orson Welles. I was obsessed with the film since the age of 15 when I first saw it. And I taught Wells a lot in the years when I was a film teacher. So I'm sure it's the film I've seen the most. And
let us know how many times. 25 times?
I think it's more. I mean, times is not quite the word, because when I was teaching it and analyzing it, I would watch a 20-minute section of the film rather than the whole film. But of course, I knew the whole film very well. I suspect I have put Citizen Kane on either by going to see it in a movie theater or by watching it in some version on my television set, whether it's a DVD or streaming it. I would say at least 50 times. Yeah.
Wow. Now, just to stress the point about, I want interactive questions coming in. Jocelyn Scott, an academic at the University of Buckingham, has asked you to nominate 3 of your great directors and why you consider them great. We're going to take that question, David, if we may, a bit later. But I'm going to take an anonymous question now, which is picking up on what you were just saying there, which is about films that stand the test of time. And which film do you think? I think you've answered that with Citizen Kane, but why do some films stand the test of time? And is there something about today's films which might be very flashy, but which lack the deep resonances that are more likely to incline them to keep in the human consciousness?
Well, we should remember that in the nature of the film business, and all films come out of the business, films are made for their opening weekend. They want to make a big impact, a big splash. They want to take in money. They want to have big crowds. They are of their moment. And, you know, we all know films that are somehow so of the moment that you never forget it. Pretty Woman with Julia Roberts is by no means a great film. I don't think it's even a good film. But when it opened, it seemed to catch something about purchase and about sexuality and about turning a hooker into a society woman that was so incredibly crazy that that film registered. And there are certain films, The Godfather was one. The Godfather changed our expectations for what a film was. We suddenly saw, oh, these bad guys, these terrible guys, these killers, they're organized. Their crime was organized, and we liked them being organized. And if you can believe it, we wanted to be in the Corleone family. Now,
did you want to be Corleone family, and who do you see yourself as?
Oh, I see myself as a Michael. I mean, Michael is the director figure in that film. He's in charge. He sits in a chair and does very little but give orders. He's a very, very endearing character to the whole community of filmmakers. People in Hollywood, this is literally the truth, in the business, they watch The Godfather at least once a year. They dress like Michael. They know the lines by heart. If you tell them, but isn't this the most appallingly cruel, callous film? They say, yes, it is. But, you know, sometimes you have to be like that. Look, Michael Corleone lies behind Donald Trump. Make no mistake about it. And it's not that films have to be laudable, honorable to make their impact. Bad films, I don't think The Godfather is a bad film, but bad films can move people as much as good films.
Okay, so Godfather 2, there might of course be a Donald Trump 2 coming up, but Godfather 2 much worse than Godfather 1 and 3.
Oh, 3 is awful. I think
3's awful.
Yeah, 3's awful. I think 2 is actually a more interesting film than 1. But I think you have to see 1 and 2 together.
Okay, we're going to now go back to your early life, born in the Second World War in Sussex, near Chichester.
I was born in London.
Oh, were you? But you went.
Yeah.
You were a Sussex.
I went.
Nurtured you.
I went to live in Sussex in the 1960s. Yes. Yeah.
Okay, so did you know as a boy, as a young man, that you were going to devote your entire life to film? What was the first film, David, that really set your heart racing?
Well, I can't remember. It was one of two. It was either Olivier's Henry V,
Mm.
or it was a Lassie film in which Lassie is pursued by the Gestapo in Norway. And I don't know which came first, but I had exactly the same response to both films. I was crying so much because of my fear for the king or for the dog that I had to be taken out of the theater. And I was taken out of the theater because I was upsetting other people. My father was very annoyed that he had to do that. And once I was outside in the lobby of the theater, I said, I've got to go back. I've got to go back and see what happens. And that feeling of fearful involvement, but being absolutely hooked and hypnotized on the action and what was going to happen, that joint feeling was there from the beginning. And I know that literally I believed behind the screen was Agincourt or was the fields of Norway. I did not understand how film worked as a technology. My parents tried to explain it to me, but I thought there was a literal reality behind the screen. And I think a lot of young children do think that when they first see
Are
film.
you still quite childlike? That ability to immerse yourself so much in the film is unusual. Has that made you the great critic that you are?
Several people in my life have told me I'm far too childlike. Sometimes they even say childish. And I plead.
Nothing wrong with being childish.
Well, good. When you get to 80, it can be a little awkward sometimes. But I mean, I think I am. I know that the passion of a film, my passion for the film, there's only two experiences in life, well, maybe three, that I can think of that match it. One is watching Chelsea, because I'm a lifelong Chelsea fan. The other is listening to jazz, and the other is a very much more basic physical response that you can probably work out for yourself.
Well, we won't go there. Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks to Jean for that question there on the early relationship with cinema. So your first book, David, Movie Man, came out in the year of Sergeant Pepper's, 1967, and you then went to the US to teach at Dartmouth College. In 75, so 8 years later. You were defining now not just your interest, but your entire career around film. Did you leave for the US because film studies was not being taken that seriously?
No, it was the opportunity that came along. It was also, I was in love with America from afar. From as soon as I could sort of think. And it wasn't just the movies, it was American writing, it was American music, it was the whole idea of this enormous, spacious country. And, you know, we live now in California and came to the West in 1981, having lived on the East Coast. And I cannot tell you what a rapturous experience being on the edge of the great deserts in the west of America has been to me. I wrote a book. Not all my books are about film. I wrote a book about Nevada because I just loved driving in the desert, and I still do. So in all of this, America has been a very, very big factor. But it's a love that's gone horribly sour because this this country could drag the world into destruction.
So, when did Britain catch up on film? One of my closest friends from university in the mid-70s went to study film in America because he said it simply wasn't good enough. He then became a film director. America was where it seemed. Did Britain catch up in its study of film?
When I left Dulwich College in 1960, there was only one place in the whole of Britain that taught film. It's called the London School of Film Technique. It was a very bad school. I went there. I had a great time there. But the choices in Britain of where to study film were non-existent. Now, film is all over the place in Britain. I can't vouch for how well it's done. I'm sure it's done well in some places. America was ahead of that game, certainly, yeah.
So, you developed this extraordinary career and passion. I'm going to take 2 or 3 questions coming in now from the audience. Watching a film in the cinema as opposed to watching it at home, can it ever be as good watching it at home? Are some kinds of films home films and others are cinema films?
I thought for decades that you couldn't really see a movie without being in a very big theater with a huge screen and ideally with a packed crowd. Now, in the last year, we have found that the process that had been going on a long time has really taken off, which is that people are more comfortable sitting at home, watching on their television set, binging sometimes. And I have been a convert to that. And I would say, for instance, in the last, I don't know, let's say the last 15 years, America simply has not produced movies, theatrical movies, that are in the same class as The Wire, The Sopranos, Breaking Bad, Ozark. And I'm just picking 4 personal favorites, but the quality of what is streaming at the moment, and I think for the foreseeable future, is so much greater. I think it was a mark of some madness that the film business thought that Tenet could save the theatrical business. They simply didn't realize that the people they want to lure out into the open and into theaters are having such a great time at home. And you know, here's another thing. The quality of the image and the sound on your home TV is probably better today than the quality of the picture and the sound in movie theaters.
So Dean here is asking a question about the impact of Netflix and Amazon Prime and Apple creating films, putting them directly on. Is the cinema dead? And why did that Nolan film crash?
I don't think the cinema is dead. I think that everyone who's had great times at the cinema is longing to be able to go back into a crowded place and watch new films and get the kind of kick out of them that they got as they were growing up years and decades ago. Whether that is going to materialize in our culture seems to be not clear. And Tenet, I think, was simply terrible marketing. I think at the moment, if people are going to be lured out into a cinema with all the dangers attendant on that, I think they want a great romance. If I were a producer, I would be making fantastic love stories at the moment.
Samantha's coming straight in there and saying, what are your favorite romantic films? Obviously, she thinks you're a great romantic.
I am a great romantic. Top of my head answer, The Shop Around the Corner with James Stewart and Margaret Sullivan, made by
Okay, there'll
Lubitsch.
be very few people who know The Shop Around the Corner.
Well, but the purpose, one of the purposes of a session like this is to get these people to go see it.
Everyone is going to look up Shop Around the Corner tonight.
Fantastic film.
Give us another one. You mentioned you mentioned Pretty Woman a moment ago, if you count that as a romance.
Well, Pretty Woman is a very good case in point, because when I saw Pretty Woman, and I've seen it many times, but from the first time, I thought, this is a pretty trashy, garbagey film, and I love it. And I loved it in part because Julia Roberts was like a new kind of flower. And you know, there are occasions in film history where someone appears on screen. Same thing happened for me with James Dean. When I saw James Dean for the first time, I thought, oh my God, that is a version of me, but a superior version of me that is so sublime. I'm crazy about the film. And when I saw Pretty Woman, I wanted Julia Roberts. You know, I mean, as simple as that. And one of the major reasons people go to the movies, and have always gone to the movies, is out of desire for these screen figures.
Okay, so by the way, I don't think that James Dean is a touch on you, David. I want you just to mention some of the other truly sensational discoveries, male and female actors who really alerted and shook theatre up when they arrived.
Well, gosh, it's so difficult off the top of your head to do that. But I mean, quickly, I think of some. When Tom Cruise slides into view in the doorway in Risky Business, I don't like Risky Business. I don't think it's a good film, but he is just a sensation in it.
Why is he a sensation?
Because I think Tom Cruise had an appetite for attention. He probably still has it. That was so enormous. It's there in Beatty and Dunaway in Bonnie and Clyde. It's as if the actors are saying, look, make this about me. And always in film history, there have been superb films that realize the power of a new kind of person. And they do something so daring with it that we all more or less fall in love with them. It happened with Chaplin. I mean, there was this comic who suddenly worked out a costume and a way of walking. And all over the world, people said, oh, gee, he's adorable. He's adorable. I can't get enough of him. So that process has been going on. And I think one of the reasons we love going to the movies is to discover a new kind of star. I'm reminded of someone contemporary. I mentioned Ozark. I love Ozark altogether. But Julia Garner in Ozark, who's just won her second Emmy for it, is just such a foul-mouthed urchin and so believable and so abrasive that she brings a new kind of persona into film. And that happens all the time. And it's one of the delights, I think, of working with actors. Because there's no question that the movies love some people and don't love others. And it's with Cary Grant. Cary Grant, if you'd put him on stage, he was on stage as a young man, but I don't think he would have been very interesting. Put him in the right movie, and he's timeless.
Alexis is very upset with you because you have mentioned it's working. You mentioned The Wire and Ozark and Breaking Bad as being of a far greatly better than Succession. I mean, what about Succession? Isn't that up there?
Because I didn't mention Succession doesn't mean I don't like it. I think it's a terrific show. I mean, I don't know how long I've got. There's so much stuff available streaming on television. Personally, I'm not as taken with Succession as with the shows I mentioned, but it's a great show, and I would encourage people to go see it. I think Brian Cox has become one of the most appealing curmudgeon actors we have, and please forgive me if I didn't mention Succession. There are probably 200 or 300 other shows I didn't mention too.
Jocelyn is saying, why is it, David, that Citizen Kane, which is on your list of top 10 films of all time, what's so special about Citizen Kane? Can you enlighten us? And another person saying, outrageous. Why have you got Citizen Kane rather than Casablanca? Who are you?
Well, I'm me. I mean, listen. If you prefer Casablanca to Citizen Kane, that's perfectly okay with me. Why is Citizen Kane special? I think fundamentally because Kane is a bad man and a good man, and he's trying to find a solution, an answer to himself and to what life was about. The answer doesn't work. Rosebud doesn't work as a solution to him, but the endeavor to find meaning, I think I've always found a very emotional and very moving part of that film. And I think that it dug into the extraordinary personality of Orson Welles, who was kind of a monster, but a poet too. And it's the extremes that he has within him. And I love films, or books for that matter, that show you a person and say, well, look, here he is doing so-and-so, but of course he does so-and-so too. And I love the contrast because we all live that way. We all have great moments and terrible moments. And I think it's a part of our real experience, and we have to treat it in the art we're making.
So taking you back to the 30s and 40s,
Yes.
did when it was the developed world's favorite pastime, and many people going to see to the cinema at least once a week to see film.
Or 3 times a week.
What was it?
Or 3 times a week.
Which is extraordinary, reflecting back on that in cultural terms and societal terms. How did film then adapt to the rise of television in the 1950s? Was there a risk that it would see off the going to films, because you could now see everything in your home? And how did film adapt to the rise of television?
Well, I think on the whole, movies adapted foolishly, because they said, well, television is small, so we'll get bigger. So they made bigger and more expensive and more pretentious films, more special effects. And they didn't realize, I think, that one of the things people most love about the movies is a kind of tenderness or an intimacy. Small stories work very well. And one of the things about these shows that stream at the moment is that they don't often have what I would call big, epic scenes, but they're wonderful about interactions between people of a really quite intimate, small nature that we can believe in and identify with. So I think even sort of in the 1950s, when the battle between the movies and television was first drawn out, you could see what is happening now, where there is a real possibility that theaters will disappear. I'm not saying they will. I think some will survive, but I think we all know that a lot of movie theaters are dead or dying and about to close. And I don't think they're ever going to come back, because it is so natural and logical and obvious for people to watch these things at home.
Can you talk about the new wave coming through of the 50s and 60s? What were the directors and the screenwriters at the time doing? The new style of actors, you mentioned James Dean.
Well, the new wave is principally French. And there was this extraordinary moment, 59 and onwards, when a bunch of young men, arrogant, egotistical, most of them had been film critics, they suddenly got the chance to make films. And the films they made were very low budget, and they found new actors for them. And these were films that captivated the world, directed by people like Truffaut, Godard, Roma, Rivette. And it was a wave that was aware of film history, but it felt that there were subject matters that were simply not dealt with in the Hollywood scheme of things, and that they should be dealt with. Basically, how young people lived. And you can see new waves coming all over the world. There was a new wave in England. There was a new wave in Italy with people like Fellini and Antonioni, Bertolucci. This is the moment where film suddenly begins to be taught in universities, where young people get the notion, which they had never had in the great days of film, they suddenly get the notion film is vital in our culture. Film helps me understand the world. It helps me fantasize about the world. It helps me dream about the world. And so film history became a very, very big subject. And I personally am so fortunate in that my instinct to write about film history coincided with a moment where the world wanted to know about film history. And, you know, I sometimes talk to Molly Haskell, who is a great critic, and she's a year older than I am, I think. But we both say, God, we were so lucky with our interest and our passion for film to be alive at that moment where all over the world, new young films suddenly forced their way onto the screens, and where American films for a time, you know, in the late 60s and early 70s, American film woke up, and people like Arthur Penn, Altman, Coppola, Scorsese started making pictures of a kind that would never have been dreamed about before. It was a wonderful time to be crazy about a film.
So what was it that prevented them blossoming or finding the money to make their films before? What was it that changed?
Well, you mentioned a word that we have to deal with, money. The film business had been dying in America. It was because it was in wreckage that a lot of young people got in and started doing what they wanted to do. But then a generation that included Spielberg and George Lucas brought the young audience back. I think George Lucas historically is a very ambivalent figure. And he brought the audience back. He gave the industry fresh confidence. He introduced a fascination with special effects so that gradually the photographic quality in films, that relationship with reality and nature began to fade away. Huge cultural difference in that films could now show us things that will never be on Earth. Whereas for a long time, films had a direct relationship with nature and reality, physical reality. That's over. Films are not photographic anymore. They are electronic, and they have a different texture.
Thanks for that phone there. That's just showing that this is a live conversation.
Absolutely.
And George Lucas, when is he at his greatest, David?
Well, for me, the best film he ever made is American Graffiti. I think it's got a zest and it's got a faith in the world he had grown up in. Excuse me a minute. And I think that's his great moment. I'm not a huge fan of the whole Star Wars empire. Never have been. And I've met George a few times, and it's a slight awkwardness between us, but there we are.
And the directors like David Lean and Hitchcock, Hitchcock is one of your great directors from this earlier period, just before we leave that. What was it about Hitchcock that made him such a compelling director?
I think that Hitchcock was always fascinated, obsessed with the technique of film storytelling. Everything in a Hitchcock film is a choice. He's the greatest director to teach to people because you can show 2 minutes of film and it is so full of choices that he has made that you are defining the nature of the medium. And basically, the choices were to build suspense and fear, anxiety. And I think that ultimately is a little bit of a limitation in his work. But he was a genius at that. He was a great example, I think, of a certain kind of repressed English imagination that was that fell in love with the sensationalism of movies. And I think that his films are timeless. You can look back at films he made in the 40s and the 50s, films like Notorious, Rear Window, and I don't think they've dated at all. He was always living in his own world, in his own head. And I think he is one of the people who defines contemporary anxiety and unease.
And your personal favorite Hitchcock?
Oh, it would be Rear Window. Some people prefer Vertigo, and you know, Vertigo is famously now in the Sight and Sound poll the best film ever made, which is a silliness to even use that term. I think Vertigo is a very morbid film and very unbelievable in lots of situations. Rear Window is a superb diagram, I think, and it's very suspenseful, very funny, very sexy, quite frightening when it wants to be. A great film.
And coming forward to Spielberg, where did Spielberg come out of? What was he contributing to film that was unique?
Well, I think Spielberg is one of the great producers, rather more than directors.
Just define that difference for everybody.
Well, a producer is someone classically who has the idea for a film and brings together the various talents that will make it. He gets the money together, he makes the business plan for it, and he has got a stamina and a drive to pull it off, to pull it through. And I think that is more important in Spielberg. It's more important in Clint Eastwood, the same way, than the actual personality of the directing, which I don't think is nearly as pronounced. I think Spielberg has one great film, which is a choice that may outrage some of your listeners. I think Empire of the Sun, made from the J.G. Ballard book, is the best film he ever made. And the brilliant identification that Christian Bale was going to be a phenomenal actor. There are other films of Spielberg's I admire and like a lot, but Empire of the Sun, I think, is a great film.
So just there on books, J.G. Ballard's celebrated novel, relatively unusual for books or even stage plays to make films?
Uh, mm, well, I think it is, and I think that sometimes short stories work better.
Give an
Sometimes,
example.
well, I think that some Maupassant short stories made wonderful films. Um, Partie de Campagne that Jean Renoir made is an example of that. Um, I, I personally love the idea of a film director conjuring up an idea or a vision or a person and building from that, as opposed to taking a novel or a play that are proven successes and adapting them. There's some very talented directors like William Wyler, who almost always adapted literary material that had done very well. And he made very good, tidy, effective films from it. Um, I prefer, I think, those situations where someone says, I see this and I feel it and I believe it. And it may be that the novel only got a bit of it, and I will change the novel in some ways.
What's
I'm
right up there with that, David? Who's really hit that on the head? Starting with
well,
that germ.
well, I mean, Mario Puzo's book, The Godfather, is clearly good, ripe material for a movie. But Coppola and the various people who worked with him, because that was a great collaboration, but they made it something more than the book because they invested themselves in that family situation. I think for Francis Coppola, for instance, the family situation in that story was not simply something to use, it was an attempt or an opportunity for him to get into his own family history. Francis, in reality, in his own family, which was a talented family, was much closer to Fredo than to Michael, if you remember the balance of the brothers in that film. And I think that he was, in truth, an outsider who wanted to be the central figure. And I think that accounts for some of the passion in The Godfather.
Which of the directors made the best film about the Vietnam War?
Well, there are a lot of very interesting feature films like Platoon and like Apocalypse Now and others. However, I would say that for me, far and away the outstanding film version is the Ken Burns documentary, The Vietnam War, which is about 16 or 17 hours long, played in Britain, I know. Uh, and I think that really, if you're going to do a thing like the Vietnam War, you really need to do it as a documentary. And one of the great things about that documentary was that it interviewed and talked to people, soldiers, civilians from North Vietnam as much as the Americans. And it gave you a sense of the war as a totality, which the feature films don't really attempt to do.
And he'd done the American Civil War before.
Do
you see something of that same spirit in Band of Brothers, that series?
Yeah, I think Band of Brothers is very good, and
but not great.
Well, we're playing with words here. I mean, I would have to sit down and see it again, and I'm not sure that I have the time. I don't mean that cynically, but time is pressing, and I think that there are subjects in our life that demand documentary. I don't want to see what I'm sure we're going to get one day quite soon. I don't want to see feature films about Donald Trump. I want to see an exhaustive, investigative documentary about the cesspit of his life and time. It's the only way to really educate Americans, particularly, about what has been happening. It's to tell the detailed truth.
Just letting that point just sink there for a moment with listeners. Questions coming back on the Vietnam War.
Yeah.
Oliver Stone on was he a great director with Platoon, Hamburger Hill, Apocalypse Now, and so on. Let's go out from Oliver Stone on that. Was he a great director? James Cameron, great director?
For me, they're not great directors. They are great showmen. They made some very, very striking films. I don't think there's a great body of consistent work, which is what I like to see in a director. But they're very important figures. And Platoon is a film full of anguish and full of physical action and adventure, and I admire the film enormously.
A non-question now. I'm a huge Woody Allen fan, but don't care to admit it. What's your view of Woody Allen?
In totality?
Yeah.
I think there was a period in his life when Woody Allen made several absolutely exquisite comedies. I think that he has been in decline as an artist for quite a long time, and clearly that decline has been affected by the way in which he's lost his audience. I think that from the whole Sun Yi episode onwards, he lost a lot of his following. And, you know, we should remember that Woody Allen was a truly adored figure for a long time. And he continues. He does work that I think is, let's say, the work of an old man. And he's obsessed with work, and I think that's a great thing. I hope he will keep doing it till the end, but I don't think he's at anywhere near his best. I think in terms of how we judge him and how we judge someone like Roman Polanski, it's an enormously complicated situation. And I would just say it's natural for audiences to hero worship directors. It's natural for film students to hero worship them because they want to be like them. But I would say this, in my experience, to be a successful film director for a long time, you have to be very tough, very egotistical, and not that pleasant. And I can believe that Allen and Polanski have done some questionable things, and I don't want to whitewash that at all. But I don't want to obliterate the memory of things as good as Chinatown, say, with Polanski, Radio Days, and many other films that Woody Allen made.
Annie Hall?
Annie Hall, sure, yes.
James is wanting to know, why is it that some film directors just seem to get better and better and others peak quite early and fade?
I think that a lot of directors, certainly in America, have never improved on their first film.
Examples?
Well, I think Orson Welles, I'd have to say. I mean, you know, he did a lot of interesting things after Kane, but I don't think he ever matched it. Terrence Malick, I think Badlands is probably the best film he's ever made. And there is a way in which that first time out is so exciting that you can achieve a kind of a love of the medium so intense, and that later on you begin to appreciate just how demanding and tiring and draining it is to make a film. On the other hand, there are people, and I would say that Jean Renoir, Louis Buñuel, going back in time, but these are classic figures, Howard Hawks, They worked for decades, and I think did a lot of their best work near the ends of their careers. And why did they do it? I think it's partly because they had learned a lot about how you do it. And you know, film directors these days don't make enough films. And you learn how to shoot scenes, you learn how to edit them, you learn things that you don't really need in the film. You should cut them out. You just get wiser and sharper about the job you're doing. And that takes persistence and a real deep love of the medium. I mean, a man like Hitchcock, for instance, he would have been absolutely lost in life if he didn't have films to make. I think that's true of Woody Allen. I think Woody Allen probably says to himself, what on earth am I going to do but make another film? Maybe I'm not as good as I was. I don't know that he thinks that, but he might think it. But he says to himself, I just got to work another film. I find myself, I have to sit down at this desk where I'm sitting now, and I have to write something. And it may not be as good as what I wrote 30 years ago, but it's all I know to do. And for me, the choices in doing it and the difficulty and solving some of the difficulties are so compelling and so satisfying. I want to do it every day. And basically, I write every day.
And clearly, in your 80th year, you have an unrivaled experience of so much film. Scott is asking about Stephen King's books and what the crack is with them that makes them great films. They start good, but the ending is bad. What is it about Stephen King and film?
Well, I think one thing is that Stephen King was a kid who grew up loving a film. I think if you read his books, and I've only read a few of his books, but I feel there is a kind of cinematic imagination there. He sees things. And I agree that some of them don't work, but you know, horror is a very difficult medium. Horror easily turns silly, foolish, and keeping it straight is very hard. For me, Kubrick's The Shining.
His greatest horror film.
I think it's the best film Kubrick made, and I think it's the best film from Stephen King. There'll be a lot of argument about that because people are very partisan with King, but I think The Shining is a masterpiece, and I'm not a huge fan of Kubrick, but I love that film.
Do you get frightened ever watching films?
Always.
What's the scariest film you've seen?
The scariest film I remember seeing was Clouseau's film Diabolique in the 1950s. And I was like, let's say I was 14 when I saw it. And for years, it affected me every time I had to go through our house, dark corridors to fetch something. It had a feeling of menace and threat in space that just overwhelmed me.
Gavin's asking who you'd like to see as the next James Bond. How did you feel about Daniel Craig? Who was the best James Bond?
Well, this dates us, but for me, and I suspect for you, it's just Sean Connery. It's Sean Connery. There's no question about it. He created
Sean Connery.
He created the role, and he did it so effortlessly. I thought Daniel Craig was okay. I hear Tom Hardy may be the next one. I have to tell you, I would not mind if there were no more James Bond films. I could live with that.
There are a lot of people weeping here, David, who are sadder but wiser following this. And here's a question from John. What is the greatest Shakespeare film? Just a quick answer of all time, do you think?
I don't know it's the greatest of all time, but I love Orson Welles' Chimes at Midnight, which is really about the Falstaff story. I love that film.
Okay, but expressly on a Shakespeare title, Zeffirelli's Romeo and Juliet? for example,
Uh,
Baz Luhrmann?
I haven't seen that for so long, so I would be nervous of saying that. I don't know. You stumped me there. I should have had advance notice of that question, so I could have had a list of films like that. Um, uh, I just don't know the answer to that. I'm
Okay,
sorry.
no, that's great. I've always wanted to get the great David Thomson stuck, bold,
Stuck.
and it's just
Stuck.
happened. Hongbo,
Yes.
one of the most serious academics at Buckingham, has come in with a question that's totally revised my opinion of you, Hongbo. What do you think of spaghetti westerns? I hopelessly love them.
If you hopelessly love them, I will not challenge you, because hopeless love is a world of its own, and I have had hopeless loves, and I resented any attempt to challenge them. I'm not personally crazy about spaghetti westerns, but that, I think, is in part because I grew up as a kid absolutely dedicated to the authenticity of the Western itself, and the air of parody or pastiche of tomato sauce, if you like, in spaghetti westerns troubled me from the beginning. But there we are.
But it gave us Clint Eastwood.
It did. I think that probably Clint Eastwood would have found a way into our attention without them, but it certainly did, and it was a very interesting stage in his career, how he exploited that genre. And Sergio Leone is a very interesting director, and there's a lot of good films like that. I personally, it's a little bit like tomato sauce. I like it in small measures.
Okay, getting towards the end, CGI, a lot of people are asking, is it going to make actors and actresses redundant?
It's going to change the status of actors and actresses. For a long time now, actors and actresses, actors, let's say, have been complaining about the difficulty and the problem in acting a scene with a green screen, which is what you have to do if you're going to fit into a CGI screen. And I think it's very difficult. But what we're talking about here is a whole change in what actors are. And I've talked a little bit about the personality of some actors and how endearing I found them. I don't think actors are the same anymore, partly because audiences don't come to them with the same kind of readiness for affection and romance.
Okay, with the clock ticking, Hannah says, in one or two words, what's your favorite Netflix original series?
Ozark.
Is it true what people say and report about Tom Cruise that he wore Cuban heels because he hates being short? That was Jack.
Well, Jack, I think you're on the money. And I think that most short people hate being short. Most tall people hate being tall. Most old people hate being old. Most young people can't wait to be older. We have a natural tendency to want to be other than we are. That's a big clue to the appeal of movies, because we go to watch people who aren't us, but who we think we could be.
Okay, and the last question of all, it's
Yes.
11 o'clock in San Francisco in the morning.
It is.
Long
It
time
is.
till dinner, but Buckingham is organising a dinner for you tonight and we can bring back people from the dead. Your favourite director who you would like to have dinner with, your favourite actress, and your favourite actor.
Oh, well, I would love to have Howard Hawks there as director. And why not? Why not keep it in the family? Let's have two of the people who did so well for him, Cary Grant and Katharine Hepburn. I would love to be there.
Well, on that note, we're going to fix that up. The finance director is making all that possible for you,
Good.
David. Thank you for sharing. And now of your time. Thank you for the questions. I think I got in about 40, I think, from a vast
A lot. Yeah.
questions
Yeah.
coming in there. Thank you for all of those. Thank you for
Let
listening,
me
everybody.
let me let me thank you for your great kindness and for doing this whole series and how much I've enjoyed talking to you.
It's been fun, and you've been really good at it. Thank you, David. Thank
Thank
you
you.
so much from us all.
Thank you. Okay. Bye.